Have you ever wondered what makes a species worth remembering in a universe that forgets everything? It's not power, not logic, not survival. It's the quiet defiance of a heartbeat that refuses to stop, even when every equation says it should. The archives call it Caldera 3, a dust world at the edge of mapped space, long abandoned, long forgotten, until a lone prospector crossed its red horizon and found someone who wasn't supposed to exist. She was an exile from a civilization that outlawed emotion. He was a man too stubborn to live by reason. Together, they built something impossible, a home born from ruin, a union born from contamination. And somewhere between sand and silence, the galaxy learned a truth it had tried to bury. You can exile compassion, but you can't kill it. Because humans don't build for profit, they build to belong. Before we begin, subscribe, like, and tell me from which city or planet you're watching this. This story explores one of humanity's greatest paradoxes: why belonging matters more than perfection. The mining drill screamed against bedrock 3 meters down, throwing sparks that died in Caldera 3's thin atmosphere before they could become stars. Jonas Hale pulled the trigger again, ignoring the pain shooting through his forearms, watching his oxygen gauge drop another percentage point. The sun-scorched desert stretched endlessly in every direction: red sand, red sky, red nothing. And somewhere beneath all that crimson emptiness, enough iridium to pay off the Copper Dawn's fuel debt. Maybe. The drill bit snapped. Again. Jonas swore, killed the power, and squinted at the distant horizon where something glinted between two dunes. Metal. Structures. Shelter. His water reserves showed 18 hours remaining, and the weather scanner on his wrist displayed a cheerful icon. Incoming sandstorm, Category 4, estimated arrival in 6 hours. The universe had a sense of humor. He gathered his equipment, checked the nav beacon on his ship 3 kilometers northeast, and started walking toward the glint. The sand whispered promises it never kept. The structure resolved into ruins as he approached, an old research station, half swallowed by dunes, its walls a patchwork of original plating and jury-rigged panels. Definitely abandoned. Probably. Jonas's hand drifted to the plasma cutter on his belt, more tool than weapon, but reassuring nonetheless. The entrance gaped open, and beyond it, darkness breathed recycled air. Inside, emergency lights flickered in sequences that shouldn't work without power. Jonas heard it before he saw it. The rhythmic clang of metal on metal, the hiss of a welding torch, someone singing in a language that sounded like wind chimes falling downstairs. He rounded a corner and froze. A woman, no, not quite human, stood with her back to him, working on a massive oxygen generator. Her skin caught the emergency lights and threw back iridescent patterns, gray-silver that shifted to pearl. Wine-dark hair fell past her shoulders, and her hands moved with mechanical precision, adjusting components most humans would need a manual to identify. She wore coveralls that had seen 100 repairs, and her boots left violet-tinged footprints in the dust. Jonas cleared his throat. She spun, a plasma torch raised like a weapon, and he found himself staring into eyes that glowed violet in the dim light. For 3 seconds, neither moved. Then he smiled, trying for friendly. She recoiled, backing against the generator, her lips pulled back from teeth that were slightly too perfect, too white, and her breathing quickened. Jonas's smile died. Right. Not human. Different rules. Easy, he said, hands up, tool belt clinking. Just looking for shelter. Storm coming. I'm Jonas. She studied him with an intensity that felt medical, analytical. When she spoke, her voice was clear but accented in ways he'd never heard. This station is claimed. You should leave. Can't. Storm will shred my lungs in 20 minutes. He gestured at the generator she'd been working on. But I can help with that. Seen that model before. Kelvin 7 series. Tricky bastards. Her eyes narrowed, measuring him like equipment. You know recycler systems? Know my way around most frontier tech. Not much choice out here. She considered this, then lowered the torch. Not friendly, but no longer hostile. Water recycler is in the east wing. Filtration is failing. Fix it, and you can stay until the storm passes. Jonas nodded, already calculating. 3 weeks, maybe 4, until the storm season ended. Long enough to prospect the area, build up supplies, maybe find that iridium. Long enough to not die alone in the red sand. Deal. She didn't offer her name. The water recycler was worse than he'd expected. Corroded seals, failing sensors, and a filtration membrane that looked like it had been installed during the first contact era. Jonas lost himself in the work, barely noticing when the storm hit. The walls shook, sand hissed against metal. The building groaned like a ship in deep water. Hours passed. The woman appeared silently at his shoulder, watched him work for 30 seconds, then handed him a self-annealing wrench without being asked. Jonas glanced at her, surprised. She didn't meet his eyes. Seals cracked, he muttered, more to himself than her. Needs replacement, but use pressure foam, she said. Temporary, but functional. He did. It worked. The recycler hummed to life, and clean water began trickling into the reserve tank. Jonas sat back, wiping sweat from his forehead, and for the first time really looked at the woman who'd been helping him. She stood apart, maintaining distance, but there was something in her posture, not just wariness, but exhaustion, the kind that went bone deep. Her coveralls were clean, but worn to transparency in places, patched with materials that didn't quite match. Her hands were scarred, nails broken from manual labor. How long have you been here? Jonas asked. 2 years? 4 months? 13 days. The precision was automatic, immediate. Since my exile. Jonas wanted to ask, but the way she said exile, like a door slamming shut, made him reconsider. Instead, he pulled out his canteen, took a sip, and offered it to her. She stared at it like it might explode. It's just water, he said. Among my people, sharing water is... She stopped, jaw tight. Never mind. I am Sareen. Valen. The name meant nothing to Jonas, but he filed it away. Jonas Hale, human, mostly. Was that almost a smile? It disappeared too quickly to tell. The storm raged for 3 days. Jonas mapped the station during the calm moments between systems failures. 37 rooms, 15 functional, the rest open to the desert. Sareen had been busy. She'd converted one room into a greenhouse, another into a workshop, a third into what looked like a meditation space with symbols painted on the walls in precise geometric patterns. The station's nav console showed its designation: Frontier Settlement Protocol, 7 Alpha, Minimal Habitable Zone, abandoned for 2 centuries. On the second day, Jonas found Sareen in the greenhouse tending plants he didn't recognize. She worked in silence, and he respected it, settling against the wall to tune his guitar. The strings were corroded, and the sound came out rough, but it filled the space between them with something other than wind. He played badly, stopping to adjust tuning every few bars. Sareen glanced up once, confusion clear on her face, but didn't speak. Jonas kept playing, letting muscle memory take over, and started humming. The melody was old, something his mother used to sing on long hauls between stations. He'd never learned all the words. When he looked up, Sareen had stopped working. She stood motionless, one hand pressed to her chest, eyes wide. Her skin had darkened somehow, the iridescence dimming to matte gray. "You all right?" Jonas asked. She turned away quickly. "What was that?" "Just an old song. Frontier ballad. Don't even remember the name." "It was..." She paused, searching for words. "Inefficient. Imprecise. But it caused a physiological response I don't understand." Jonas grinned despite himself. "Yeah, that's pretty much what music does." "Why?" He shrugged. "Makes us feel less alone, I guess." Sareen was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was softer. "Play it again." He did. On the third day, the storm broke. Jonas stood in the airlock, watching red dust settle back to Earth, and made a decision that would have made his younger self run screaming. He turned back to Serene, who was checking the generator readings, and cleared his throat. "Storm season's got another month," he said. "My ship's 3 clicks out, and I've got surveying equipment. Could map this sector, see if there's anything worth mining. If you're willing to share resources, I could pay my way in salvage and repairs." Serene didn't look up from the console. "You want to stay?" "Temporarily. Mutual benefit. I need shelter. You need help maintaining this place. Fair trade." She pulled up a file on the console, and Jonas caught a glimpse of text in a language he didn't recognize. Something official. Something that used words like exile and contamination and permanent. The Valen Exile Code 314, he'd later learn. Punishment for compassionate contamination. "Half the resources," Serene said finally. "Half the work. No interference with my routines. Deal." She met his eyes then, and Jonas saw something shift. Not trust, not yet. But the first crack in a wall that had been built to last forever. That night, Jonas lay in the quarters Serene had designated, a small room with a functioning bunk and a window that looked out over the desert. 2 moons rose over the horizon, one amber and one pale blue, painting the dunes in colors that didn't exist on Earth. His mother's pendant felt heavy against his chest, the silver sun worn smooth by decades of touch. He'd lost 2 partners to this life. Both good people. Both gone because he'd been somewhere else when systems failed, when accidents happened, when the frontier showed its teeth. He'd learned to keep moving, never stop long enough for attachment to take root. Safer that way. But as he drifted towards sleep, Jonas heard something that made him pause. From somewhere in the station, Serene was singing. The melody was alien, crystalline, nothing like human music. But underneath it, woven through like a second voice, was the frontier ballad he'd played that afternoon. She'd remembered every note. In the workshop, Serene stood alone, hands pressed against the cool metal of a workbench, breathing carefully. The human's music had done something to her, opened something she'd spent 2 years keeping locked away. Emotions were contamination. Attachment was weakness. These were the first principles of Valen culture, the foundation of their civilization's 3,000-year survival. She had broken these principles once, when she'd tried to save a human colony from atmospheric failure. The Valen High Council had been clear. Contaminated minds cannot be rehabilitated. She'd been exiled here, to die or endure, but never to return. And now another human had arrived, with his strange, inefficient smile and his imprecise music and his casual offer of water. Sharing water. Among her people, that was reserved for... No, she wouldn't think about that. The console beside her flickered, showing a new message. Serene's hand trembled as she opened it. Her sister's face appeared, and even through the transmission lag, the disapproval was clear. "Serene, I detected power signatures at your location. If you're harboring refugees, remember the Council's decree. Compassion is contamination. Logic is purity. Return to sense, or accept permanent exile." The message ended. Serene stared at the blank screen for a long time, then deleted the file. Outside, the desert wind sang its endless song, and somewhere in the station, a guitar hummed tunelessly as Jonas Hale fixed something that had been broken for too long. The first crack had become a fault line, and in the morning, they would both pretend not to notice. Jonas found the rhythm quickly. Mornings meant checking systems, afternoons meant prospecting the desert, evenings meant repairs. Serene kept to her own schedule, their paths crossing at functional intervals. They spoke in technical terms, shared resources with mathematical precision, and maintained a distance that felt safer than conversation. It lasted exactly 12 days before the universe intervened. Jonas was rerouting power cables in the North Corridor when the ground trembled. Small tremor, barely noticeable, but enough to shift the ancient support beam he was working under. The beam groaned, dropped 3 centimeters, and caught his left arm between metal and wall. The pain was immediate and absolute. Jonas gritted his teeth, tried to pull free, couldn't. The beam settled with finality. His vision sparked at the edges. "Serene!" His voice came out wrong, too high. "Need help!" She appeared within seconds, assessed the situation with those analytical eyes, and immediately began calculating. "Don't move. The beam is load-bearing. If I shift it wrong, the corridor collapses." "Fantastic news," Jonas gasped. "Love it. Do it anyway." Serene's hands moved across her datapad, pulling up structural schematics. Her fingers trembled slightly. 3 options. First, I slowly lift while you extract yourself. Second, I cut through the beam, risking structural failure. Third, I amputate your arm. Let's skip option 3. Logical choice. She set down the datapad, positioned herself at the beam's pressure point, and looked at him directly. "On 3. 1. She lifted on 2. Jonas swallowed a scream, yanked his arm free, and collapsed backward. Serene lowered the beam carefully, then knelt beside him. His arm was already swelling, bruising in patterns that would look spectacular tomorrow. She touched it with clinical precision, feeling for breaks. Jonas flinched. Serene froze, her hand still on his forearm. "Among my people," she said carefully, "physical contact is reserved for combat or mating, nothing else. Among mine, it's usually comfort," Jonas managed through clenched teeth. "Medical attention, friendship. Friendship." She said the word like she was trying it on for the first time. "You have many words for inefficient behaviors. Inefficient doesn't mean worthless." Serene didn't respond, but she also didn't pull her hand away. She finished examining his arm with methodical care, then helped him to the medical bay. The station's ancient med kit offered basic supplies, sealant, pain suppressors, diagnostic scanners from an era when humans still used physical keyboards. "Fractured," Serene announced, reading the scanner. "2 bones, clean breaks. You'll need immobilization for 6 weeks. 3 weeks, Jonas countered. 4 maximum. Got work to do." "Humans." She shook her head, mixing compounds for a bonding cast. "You treat your bodies like they're expendable. Coming from someone who's been running this station alone for 2 years, that's rich." Serene's hands paused. When she spoke, her voice was quieter. "That was necessity. This is pride. Maybe pride is necessary sometimes." She applied the cast in silence, her movements gentle despite her earlier words about Valen touch taboos. Jonas watched her work, noting the way her iridescent skin darkened when she concentrated, how her breathing synchronized to some internal rhythm he couldn't quite follow. "Why were you exiled?" he asked. Serene's hands stilled. For a moment, he thought she wouldn't answer. Then she set down the medical tools and pulled up a file on her datapad. The screen showed what looked like a colony dome, human architecture, and breach warnings flashing in multiple languages. "Arcturus Station," she said. "Human colony, 300 inhabitants. Atmospheric processor failed. They had 72 hours before oxygen depletion. I was conducting nearby research. I diverted my ship, transported the colony to safety, and returned them once repairs were complete." Jonas stared. That's a good thing. Why would they exile you for that?" "The Valen Treaty of Coexistence, Article 9, forbids intervention in other species' internal crises. We observe, we document, but we do not interfere. Compassion compromises objectivity. Objectivity ensures survival." She recited it like scripture. "I broke the treaty. I was contaminated by human irrationality. The Council declared me permanently exiled." "Contaminated by irrationality," Jonas repeated, anger building. "You saved 300 lives and violated 3,000 years of cultural law." Serene closed the file. "They were not wrong, Jonas. I felt something when I saw those humans dying, something illogical, inefficient, and overwhelming. Fear, not for myself, but for them. That is contamination. That's called being decent. Decency is subjective. Logic is absolute. Jonas wanted to argue, but the pain suppressors were kicking in, dragging him towards sleep. His last conscious thought was that Serene's hand was still resting on his arm, warm and steady, and she hadn't seemed to notice. The days that followed were strange. Jonas couldn't prospect with his arm in a cast, couldn't do heavy repairs, couldn't even tune his guitar properly. He felt useless, a burden, exactly the thing he'd spent 15 years avoiding. Serene adjusted without comment, taking on extra work while he handled navigation, inventory management, and planning. On the 5th day of his recovery, she brought him coffee. Jonas stared at the cup like it had appeared via quantum tunneling. "You made coffee?" "I followed the instructions in your Kuiper Belt survival manual," Serene said, consulting a battered book with annotations in 3 languages. "Water temperature 93 degrees Celsius. Ground beans from your personal supplies. Steep for 4 minutes. The manual suggests this beverage makes frontier life bearable." Jonas took the cup, sipped, and tried not to react. It tasted like battery acid mixed with regret. "It's perfect. Thank you." Serene's skin flickered through several colors before settling on pleased silver blue. "You're lying. Your expression indicates distress." "Little bit," Jonas admitted, grinning. "But the effort counts for a lot." Inefficient. But she was almost smiling. Almost. She sat across from him, pulled out her own datapad, and they worked in comfortable silence. After an hour, Jonas started humming. After 2, he realized Serene was humming with him. Not the same melody, but something that harmonized in unexpected ways. When he looked up, she'd stopped working entirely, her eyes closed, hands resting palm up in her lap. "What is that?" he asked. "What you're singing?" "A Valen work meditation. It structures thought, prevents emotional contamination." She opened her eyes. "But when combined with your melody, it becomes something else. Something that feels like... Like? I don't have the word." She looked frustrated, vulnerable in a way he'd never seen. "It makes my chest hurt in a way that isn't pain. Is that normal?" Jonas felt something crack open in his own chest. "Yeah, that's normal. That's music working the way it's supposed to." They sat there, neither moving, while the station hummed around them, and the desert wind sang accompaniment through the ventilation. Later, Jonas would mark this as the moment everything changed. The moment friendship stopped being theoretical and became inevitable. That night, he woke to sounds from Serene's quarters, muffled, desperate, unmistakably distressed. Jonas hesitated, remembering her words about Valen touch taboos, about contamination and logic, and all the walls she'd built. Then he heard her cry out, and instinct overrode culture. He found her curled on her bunk, shaking, skin flickering through colors that looked like pain translated into light. Nightmare. Had to be. Jonas approached carefully, sat at the edge of the bunk, and without thinking, placed his good hand on her shoulder. Serene exploded into motion. 1 second she was asleep. The next, she'd pinned him against the wall, forearm across his throat, eyes wild and unseeing. Jonas didn't fight back. He went limp, made himself smaller, and spoke softly. "Serene, it's Jonas. You're safe. Station Caldera Zeta, you're safe." Recognition flickered in her eyes. Horror followed. She released him immediately, stumbling backward, hands up like she was the threat. "I could have killed you." "But you didn't." Jonas rubbed his throat, breathing carefully. "Bad dream?" "Valen don't dream. We process experiences during meditation." But her voice shook. "I saw the colony, Arcturus. I saw them dying, and I saw my sister's face when she delivered my exile sentence, and I..." She stopped, pressing palms against her eyes. "This is contamination, emotional dysfunction. I should be better than this." "You should be human," Jonas said quietly. "Nobody gets through trauma without scars. Not even Valen. I am not human. No, but maybe that doesn't matter as much as you think. Sareen looked at him then, really looked, and something in her expression broke. Among my people, when someone witnesses vulnerability, protocol demands immediate isolation. The contaminated must not spread their weakness. Among mine, Jonas said, when someone's hurting, you sit with them until dawn if that's what they need. That is inefficient, probably. And you would do this? Sit with me? Jonas picked up his guitar from where he'd left it by the door, settled against the wall, and started playing. Badly, because of the cast, but steadily. Already am. Sareen didn't speak for a long time. Finally, she sat on her bunk, wrapped a blanket around her shoulders, and began humming that Valen work meditation. It wove through Jonas's frontier ballad like silver thread through copper wire. Two voices that shouldn't harmonize but somehow did. They stayed like that until Caldera 3's twin moons set, and the desert dawn turned the world to copper and gold. Something in the station's air changed after that night. Sareen started joining Jonas for morning coffee, despite insisting it tasted like refined chemicals. Jonas started learning basic Valen phrases, mangling the pronunciation so badly that Sareen actually laughed. A sound like crystal chimes, there and gone in an instant. They worked together more, spoke more, existed in the same spaces without the careful distance that had defined their first weeks. The greenhouse became their unofficial meeting place. Sareen had engineered a hybrid growing environment, earth plants on one side, Valen flora on the other. Jonas watched, fascinated, as tendrils from both species began reaching toward each other, intertwining without competing. They're not supposed to do that, Sareen said, concerned. Different root systems, different nutrient requirements. By all logic, one should kill the other. But they're not, Jonas observed. They're cooperating. Inefficient. Or maybe, Jonas said carefully, logic isn't the only thing that works. Sareen touched one of the intertwined plants, her expression unreadable. When she spoke, her voice was barely audible. My sister sent another message. 14 Valen ships passed through this sector last month. None stopped. None acknowledged my distress signals. To them, I am already dead. Jonas wanted to offer comfort, but he'd learned that Sareen processed things in her own time, in her own way. Instead, he pulled the pendant from around his neck, the silver sun his mother had given him, worn smooth by decades of touch. The back was engraved with coordinates. LV 426, he said. Hadley's Hope. My mother died there when I was 15. Colony breach, same as Arcturus. I wasn't there. I was 3 systems away on a supply run, being young and stupid and sure I had time. He turned the pendant in his hand, watching light catch the grooves. Point is, I know what it's like to lose home. To be the one who survives when others don't. Sareen took the pendant carefully, studied the coordinates. This colony, gone, 40 years ago. But Mom always said the gold is in what you find, not what you dig for. Jonas smiled tiredly. Took me until now to understand what she meant. What did she mean? That home isn't a place. It's what you build with the people who see you broken and stay anyway. Sareen handed back the pendant, her fingers lingering against his for a fraction too long. That is the most inefficient philosophy I have ever heard. Yeah? Her skin flickered to that pleased silver blue. I think I'm beginning to understand why humans survive. Outside, the desert wind picked up, carrying the first whispers of the next storm. But inside Station Caldera Zeta, 2 exiles sat in a greenhouse full of impossible things, humming songs that had no right to harmonize, and slowly, carefully, began to believe that survival might not be the same as living. The season turned. Jonas's arm healed, and neither of them mentioned the growing certainty that when the storms ended, something would have to change. Because the universe had a sense of humor, and it wasn't finished with them yet. The alert came at 0400 hours, screaming through the station's emergency channels in Valen binary. Sareen was at the console before Jonas had fully woken, her fingers flying across the interface, skin cycling through colors he'd learned meant fear. "Bounty hunters," she said flatly. "Red Sector 9 clearance, 3 ships, approaching fast." Jonas pulled on his boots, grabbed his toolkit. "How much time?" 18 hours. Maybe less if they push their engines. She pulled up the transmission, and Jonas saw numbers that made his blood run cold. 10,000 credits. Alive or dead, preference for alive. Target, Serene, Valen Exile, contaminated by human contact. Warning, may resist with illogical violence. "We run," Jonas said immediately. "Get to the Copper Dawn, burn out of here before they arrive." "No. Serene, no." She closed the file, turned to face him. "I have spent 2 years building this station, making it livable, creating something that could shelter anyone, any species who needs refuge. If I run now, it was all meaningless. Just sand and time wasted. Better wasted than dead. You don't understand." Her voice carried an edge he'd never heard. "Among Valen, exile is permanent. If I run, I spend eternity running. If I stand, at least I stand for something." Jonas wanted to argue, wanted to grab her, physically drag her to his ship, fly away from this red dust tomb and its impossible choices. Instead, he heard himself say, "Then we defend it." Serene stared at him. "You would fight for a place that isn't yours, for a person who isn't even your species." "Yeah." Jonas met her eyes. "Turns out I'm contaminated too." Something shifted in her expression. Surprise, gratitude, terror, all cycling too fast to identify. She pulled up station schematics, and together they began planning the impossible. The Copper Dawn yielded mining charges, ion cutters, and a pulse rifle Jonas had sworn he'd never need. The station's old defenses were mostly stripped, but Serene's engineering expertise and Jonas's frontier improvisation made strange alchemy. They rigged the entrance with pressure sensors, turned the solar panels into makeshift EMPs, set up false power signatures in 3 different locations to split their attackers' attention. The work was frantic, exhausting, and punctuated by small moments that felt stolen from another life. Jonas teaching Serene to swear properly in 4 languages, Serene explaining Valen combat philosophy with clinical precision, both of them pretending this was theoretical, not desperate. On the 15th hour, Jonas noticed Serene's hands shaking as she soldered a connection. He touched her shoulder, carefully, always carefully, and she leaned into it before catching herself. "I'm afraid," she said quietly. "That's contamination. I shouldn't feel this. Being afraid means you've got something to lose." Jonas squeezed gently. "That's not contamination. That's being alive." The council would disagree. The council isn't here. They finished the last connection as the sun set, painting the desert in shades of blood and copper. Jonas stood at the airlock watching the horizon and felt Serene move beside him. Not touching, but close. Closer than protocol allowed. "Jonas." Her voice was careful, measured. "If we survive this, when we survive." "When?" She corrected herself, skin flickering uncertain. "Will you stay, after the storm season ends?" The question hung between them like a physical thing. Jonas thought about all the places he'd run from, all the connections he'd cut before they could tangle. Thought about his mother's pendant, about Hadley's hope, about gold, and what you find versus what you dig for. "Yeah," he said. "I'll stay." Serene's hand found his. Valen touch taboos be damned. They held position until dawn, when the sensors screamed warnings in 3 languages. 8 ships, not 3. The bounty hunters had called for backup. "We can't win this," Serene said, watching the tactical display. Her engineering projections showed a 23% survival probability, and that was generous. "Don't need to win." Jonas loaded the pulse rifle, checked the charge. "Just need to make them reconsider." "That is the most human thing you've ever said." "I'll take that as a compliment." The first ship came in fast, strafing the station's perimeter with plasma fire. Jonas returned fire from the north turret, a converted mining rig that shouldn't work as a weapon but did, because necessity cared nothing for engineering specs. The ship banked, circled, and Jonas remembered every combat sim he'd failed in basic training. Remembered why he'd chosen mining over military service. He hit it anyway. Pure luck, but the ship spiraled into the dunes, trailing smoke. "One down," Serene announced from the control room. 7 remaining. They're adapting their pattern. The next hour was chaos compressed into crystalline moments. Jonas firing, reloading, firing again. Serene rerouting power, calling out positions, her voice steady even as explosions rocked the station's foundations, the generators screaming as they pulled more energy than they were rated for. The smell of burning circuits and superheated sand. Jonas was reloading when a blast took out the turret's north wall. The explosion threw him backward, and he felt something in his left hand crack. Not break, not yet, but close. He pulled himself up, found the rifle, kept firing. "Jonas, north corridor is breached." Serene's voice carried an edge of panic. "They're inside." He ran. His hand screamed protest. He ignored it. Found 3 Valen in combat armor advancing on the control room, weapons raised. They moved with mechanical precision, flanking patterns, exactly the kind of coordinated assault that should overwhelm a Prospector and an Exile. Jonas raised the rifle, knowing he was outgunned, outmanned, absolutely going to die here. Then Serene emerged from a side passage, wielding a plasma cutter like a sword, and Jonas understood why the Valen feared contamination. She moved like violence had become poetry, every action efficient and brutal and precise. 1 attacker down, 2. The third turned his weapon on Jonas. Serene stepped between them. Time crystallized. Jonas saw the weapon charge, saw Serene's skin flare bright violet, saw her calculate angles and trajectories and acceptable losses, saw her choose. The blast caught her in the shoulder, spinning her sideways, and Jonas fired before conscious thought intervened. The attacker dropped. The corridor went silent except for alarms and Serene's labored breathing. "You're insane," Jonas said, catching her as she stumbled. Blood, silver and luminous, stained her coveralls. The injury was cauterized but deep. "You could have been killed." "Statistically certain," Serene agreed, voice tight with pain. "But the alternative involved your death. That was unacceptable." "Unacceptable. That's the word you're using. Would you prefer another?" Jonas wanted to laugh, wanted to cry, wanted to kiss her and shake her and never let go. Instead, he helped her to the medical bay while the station continued falling apart around them. The med scanner showed tissue damage, minor fractures, and elevated stress markers that would have hospitalized a human. Serene waved it away, already trying to stand. "The generator. You need to not die," Jonas snapped, mixing emergency sealant. "I can handle the generator." "You don't know the protocols." "Then talk me through it." He applied the sealant with shaking hands, watching silver blood stop flowing. "We're partners, remember? Half the work." Serene's eyes met his, and something in her expression shifted. Not logic, not calculation, something messier and more human. "Partners," she repeated. "Yes." They made it back to the control room as another explosion rocked the eastern wing. The tactical display showed 4 ships remaining, circling like sharks, coordinating for a final assault. Serene pulled up power distribution, and Jonas saw her fingers hesitate over the generator controls. "There's an option," she said slowly. "Overload the Mark 7 generator. Create an electromagnetic pulse. It would disable their ships. And destroy half the station's systems, possibly the entire eastern wing. The explosion would be..." She showed him the calculations. 800% above safety specifications. Chances of survival, 42%. Jonas looked at the numbers, looked at Serene, injured and determined and absolutely not backing down. Looked at the station they'd defended together, the greenhouse full of impossible plants, the quarters where they'd sat through nightmares until dawn. "Do it," he said. Jonas, you said if you run, it's meaningless. If we surrender, same result. But if we stand? He took her hand, the one not working the controls. We stand together. Serene's skin flickered through a dozen colors before settling on something Jonas had never seen. Rose gold, warm and terrified, and resolved. She pulled up the generator interface with her good hand, Jonas supporting her injured side, and together they initiated the overload sequence. The countdown began. 3 minutes. The remaining ships closed in, sensing vulnerability. Serene programmed the pulse's parameters, while Jonas redirected all non-essential power to structural integrity. They moved in perfect synchronization, no words needed, just trust and desperation, and something neither would name yet. 1 minute. The generator's whine became a scream. The walls shook. Through the cracked viewports, Jonas saw the ships taking attack positions, saw weapons charging, saw the end approaching with mathematical certainty. 30 seconds. Serene's hand found his. Jonas squeezed back, his left hand useless, but his right steady. They stood there, two exiles at the end of the world, and if they were afraid, they faced it together. If this doesn't work, Serene started, it'll work. How can you know? Jonas smiled, the expression feeling strange on his face. Because you're the smartest person I've ever met, and I'm too stubborn to die. Seems like decent odds. That is not how statistics work. Good thing I'm bad at math. 10 seconds. The generators screamed. The station groaned. Reality held its breath. 5, 4, 3. Serene turned to Jonas, her violet eyes catching the emergency lights, and said something in Valen that he didn't understand, but felt in his bones. 2, 1. The world became light and thunder, and the universe having the last laugh. The electromagnetic pulse ripped outward in a perfect sphere, washing over the attacking ships like a wave. Their systems failed simultaneously. Engines, weapons, navigation, everything powered by technology screaming and dying. The ships spiraled downward, crashing into red sand with impacts that shook the horizon. Inside the station, every light went dark. The generator exploded with a roar that belonged to dying stars, tearing through the eastern wing like a knife through paper. The shockwave threw Jonas and Serene backward, and he felt his left hand finally break completely, bones cracking with finality. Then silence, absolute and ringing. Jonas lay in the wreckage, dust settling around him, and tried to remember how breathing worked. His hand was agony, his ribs hurt, everything hurt. But he was alive. They were alive. Serene, his voice came out as a croak, a cough, movement in the darkness. Then Serene was there, illuminated by the violet glow of her own skin, crawling toward him over broken equipment and shattered dreams. Her shoulder was bleeding again, her coveralls torn, but she was smiling. Actually smiling. She reached him, collapsed against his side, and started laughing. Not the crystal chime sound he'd heard before, but something raw and human and completely contaminated. Jonas joined her, laughing through broken ribs and broken bones, and neither of them could have said why. Maybe because they'd survived, maybe because they shouldn't have, maybe because logic had failed and faith had barely succeeded, and that seemed like the funniest thing in the universe. Serene's laughter turned to tears, and Jonas realized she was shaking, not from cold, but from everything she'd held back for 2 years, all the fear and grief and impossible choices finally breaking free. He wrapped his good arm around her, pulled her close, and let her cry on his shoulder, while the station settled around them. "We did it," he whispered into her wine-dark hair. "We're still here." "Statistically impossible," Serene managed. "Yeah, we're good at impossible." They stayed like that until the dust cleared and the emergency lights flickered back online, painting the ruins in amber and shadow. The station was a wreck. Eastern wing gone, generator destroyed, half their systems fried. But the core remained. The greenhouse remained. They remained. Later, when Serene had enough strength to check the sensors, they found no life signs from the crashed ships. The bounty hunters were dead or fled. The transmission logs showed a final message uploaded before the pulse hit, marked with Valen priority codes and encrypted with algorithms Jonas couldn't begin to understand. Serene translated with a voice like ash. They declared me officially terminated. Contamination eliminated. The bounty is closed. She looked at Jonas, her expression unreadable. I'm dead to my people now, permanently. Not dead, Jonas said firmly. Just free. Free. She tasted the word, and something in her posture changed. Not relief. Not yet. But the first hint of it. Among my people, the exiled do not get rescue, do not get second chances. We end where we are discarded. Good thing you're not just Valen anymore. Jonas pulled himself upright, biting back pain. You're also whatever the hell this is. This station, this stand, this... He gestured at the ruins around them, the impossible survival, the two of them still breathing when mathematics said otherwise. This proof that sometimes being contaminated is just another word for being alive. Serene reached up, touched his face with her good hand, and Jonas saw everything she was feeling flicker across her skin. Fear, grief, gratitude, hope. And underneath all of it, something warm and rose gold and absolutely terrifying. Jonas Hale, she said carefully, among my people, when someone saves your life repeatedly, shares their resources, defends your home, and stands with you against impossible odds, we have a term. It translates roughly to bonded mate. Jonas's heart kicked against his ribs. Among mine, we usually start with, would you like to get coffee sometime? But I think we skipped a few steps. Many steps. Her smile was fragile, uncertain, and the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. Is that acceptable? Yeah. He leaned forward carefully, mindful of injuries, and kissed her forehead. That's acceptable. Outside, the desert wind sang through the broken walls, carrying the taste of sand and freedom and futures that hadn't existed 12 hours ago. The station was destroyed. They were injured. Tomorrow would bring 100 impossible challenges. But tonight, two exiles held each other in the ruins of their stand and discovered that survival was just the beginning of something larger, something that looked suspiciously like home. Recovery was slow, painful, and punctuated by small victories that felt monumental. Jonas's left hand healed crooked. The med scanner showed permanent nerve damage, reduced mobility, the kind of injury that would end a mining career before it started. He learned to compensate, to do with one hand what used to take two, to accept that efficiency sometimes meant accepting limitations. Serene's shoulder took longer. Valen physiology was complex, their healing rapid but perfectionist. Every night, Jonas changed her dressings and watched silver-threaded tissue knit itself back together with mathematical precision. Every night, she sat still for his ministrations, and slowly, gradually, stopped flinching when he touched her. They rebuilt the station one system at a time: water recycler, atmospheric processor, communications array. The greenhouse, miraculously, had survived mostly intact. The hybrid plants still growing, still reaching for each other across the divide between species. On the 23rd day after the attack, Jonas was patching hull breaches in the eastern wing when his comm crackled to life. Jonas, the long-range array is functional. Serene's voice carried a strange note, not quite hope, not quite fear. I'm receiving transmissions, multiple sources, human, Valen, and others. They're talking about us. Jonas climbed down from the hull, wiping sweat and rust from his face. Talking how? See for yourself. The control room's main display showed a cascade of transmissions, news feeds, encrypted military channels, everything from official government broadcasts to what looked suspiciously like tabloid gossip. Jonas scrolled through, reading fragments, and felt reality tilt sideways. Valen Scientific Observation Report, Codex Entry, 7841. Phenomenon identified as human pack bonding has reached unprecedented levels. Subject designated Serene Exile Zeta has demonstrated loyalty patterns inconsistent with Valen psychology. Recommend further study of interspecies contamination vectors. Human Frontier Authority. Bulletin: Caldera 3 incident confirms partnership between human prospector Jonas Hale and Valen Exile. Bounty hunter casualties, 8 confirmed. Requesting clarification on settlement status and resource claims. Intercepted mercenary transmission. They fought like bonded mates. Never seen anything like it. Valen doesn't move like that for her own kind. Something's wrong, or right. Can't tell anymore. And buried in the encrypted channels, a message that made Serene's hands shake. Valen, Medical Council notation. Subject: Serene displays interspecies loyalty syndrome, previously theoretical. Contamination has progressed beyond reversibility. Subject is lost to logic. Recommend observation from distance. They're watching us, Serene whispered, studying us, like we're some kind of experiment. We're not an experiment. Jonas took her hand, careful of the healing shoulder. We're just 2 people who refused to die alone. 2 people who broke every protocol, defied every statistical probability, and survived through sheer irrational stubbornness. Serene looked at him, violet eyes bright with something that might have been tears. Jonas, do you understand what we've done? We've proven that Valen can be contaminated, that their vaunted logic can be compromised by human emotional irrationality. I'm not just exiled anymore. I'm evidence. Evidence of what? That maybe we were wrong. For 3,000 years, my people have chosen logic over emotion, calculation over compassion, survival over connection. And in one season, on one forgotten planet, a human prospector showed me that those choices aren't absolute. She touched his face, fingertips tracing the scar a falling beam had left across his jaw. You showed me that being alive is more than just not dying. Jonas caught her hand, pressed it against his cheek. And you showed me that home isn't something you run from. It's something you build, even in the ruins. They stood there in the control room, surrounded by transmissions from people who wanted to study them, contain them, understand them. Neither noticed when Serene moved closer, when the distance they'd maintained became unbearable. Neither noticed when standing became leaning, became holding each other like shipwreck survivors clinging to driftwood. What they noticed was the kiss. It was nothing like the desperate collision after the battle. This was slow, careful, 2 people discovering what it meant to choose each other when the universe stopped forcing the choice. Serene tasted like mint and copper. Jonas's hand, his good hand, tangled in her wine-dark hair, and she made a sound that might have been his name or might have been prayer. When they pulled apart, her skin glowed rose gold, and Jonas realized he was laughing. What? Serene asked, her own smile uncertain, but real. Just thinking about how much the council would hate this. Jonas gestured at them, at the station, at the impossible thing they'd become. All their protocols, all their logic, and none of it could stop a lonely Valen from falling for a stubborn human. Falling. Serene tested the word, and her expression turned serious. Is that what this is? If you want it to be. I want... She stopped, struggling with words. Among my people, we don't have concepts for this. For choosing someone not because logic demands it, not because biology requires it, but because their absence would be worse than exile. Among mine, Jonas said softly, we call that love. Love. The word sounded foreign in her mouth. That's contamination. That's weakness. That's everything I was taught to fear. And? Serene's smile was fierce, beautiful, completely uncontaminated by doubt. And I think your people are right about this one. The days that followed were strange. They continued rebuilding, but now with a purpose that went beyond survival. Jonas started planning expansions, additional quarters, larger storage, infrastructure that could support more than 2 people. Serene began reaching out through the repaired communications array, sending carefully worded messages to contacts she'd maintained despite exile. The responses came slowly, cautiously. A Valan scientist who'd always questioned the exile protocols. A human trader who'd been looking for stable frontier outposts. A Rithani merchant who trafficked in both goods and gossip. None of them committed to visiting, but none of them refused either. On the 47th day, Serene received a transmission that changed everything. It wasn't encrypted, wasn't official, just a single line of text in Valan script sent from an unregistered relay. Jonas found her in the greenhouse, staring at her datapad like it might explode. "What is it?" "My sister." Serene's voice was barely audible. "Lyris, she's asking if I'm truly alive." "What did you tell her?" "Nothing yet." Serene set down the datapad, looked at the hybrid plants surrounding them. Earth tomatoes twining with Valan luminaries, two species that shouldn't coexist, creating something more beautiful than either alone. "If I respond, I confirm my survival. Confirm that contamination didn't kill me. That might encourage others to question their exile. Would that be bad? For the Council? Yes. For the exiled." Her skin flickered uncertain colors. "I don't know. What if they come here? What if Caldera becomes a sanctuary for the contaminated, and the Council decides that's unacceptable?" Jonas moved beside her, wrapped his good arm around her waist. "Then we'll do what we do best. Stand our ground. Build something worth defending. And if they come..." He paused, considering. "We'll show them what contamination actually looks like. And what does it look like?" He gestured at the station around them, at the repaired systems and rebuilt walls, at the garden full of impossible growth. Like this. Like choosing to live instead of just survive. Like making coffee even though it tastes terrible, and learning songs that hurt your chest, and standing with someone when every statistical model says you should run. Serene leaned into him, her head on his shoulder, and Jonas felt the weight of everything they'd survived press down and somehow, impossibly lift. She pulled up the datapad and typed a response. 3 words in Valan script that Jonas couldn't read. "What did you say?" "I told her yes. I'm alive. And I'm home." The transmission sent. Somewhere in the vast darkness between stars, Lyris would receive it, would show it to others, or keep it secret, would change, or stay the same. They'd never know which. But in that moment, in a greenhouse full of hybrid life on a forgotten frontier planet, 2 exiles held each other and chose to believe that contamination, like everything else, was just a matter of perspective. 3 months passed. The station grew. Word spread. The first visitor arrived on a human transport, a young botanist named Wei, who'd heard about the hybrid garden and wanted to study it. She stayed for 6 days, took extensive notes, and left with seeds and questions. The second was a Valan technician named Kresh, who'd been exiled for refusing a military assignment on ethical grounds. He arrived suspicious, left 2 weeks later with tears in his eyes and a job offer he'd accepted before his ship cleared orbit. The third was Serene's sister. Jonas saw the ship approach through the station's external cameras, sleek, Valan design, moving with the kind of precision that suggested military training. He found Serene in their quarters, the space they'd started sharing without ever discussing it, and she was shaking. "She came," Serene whispered. "I didn't think she would. I didn't think she'd risk." "It'll be okay." Jonas squeezed her hand. "Whatever happens, we face it together." They met Lyris at the airlock. She was older than Serene, taller, with skin that glowed pure white and eyes like chips of ice. Every line of her posture screamed Valan authority, Valan certainty, Valan logic untouched by human chaos. She looked at Serene for a long moment, then at Jonas, then at the station behind them, scarred, rebuilt, alive. "You destroyed 8 bounty hunter ships," Lyris said finally. "Contamination theory suggests the exiled become weak, irrational, easily eliminated. You proved otherwise." The theory's wrong, Serene said, her voice steady despite the shaking. Contamination doesn't make you weak. It makes you human. You're Valen. I'm both. Serene gestured at Jonas, at the station, at everything they'd built. I'm contaminated by compassion, corrupted by emotion, compromised by love, and I'm stronger for it. Lyris was quiet for a long time. When she spoke again, her voice carried a note Jonas couldn't quite identify. The Council is afraid of you. Do you understand that? They exile individuals to protect the collective. But if the exiled thrive, if they build, create, attract others, then exile becomes choice instead of punishment, and choice undermines absolute logic. Good, Jonas said. Maybe absolute logic needs undermining. Lyris's gaze snapped to him, and for a heartbeat, Jonas thought she might attack. Then something in her expression shifted. Not quite a smile, but not quite stone anymore either. You realize what you've started here? She asked. This station will become a symbol. The contaminated will come. The questioning will follow. You'll be responsible for every exile who risks the journey. Every Valen who chooses emotion over logic. Yes, Serene said simply. I know. Lyris studied her sister for another moment, then reached into her robes and pulled out a data crystal. The Council's official position is that you're dead. They'll never acknowledge otherwise. But there are others, scientists, philosophers, even a few Council members, who question the exile protocols, who wonder if logic without compassion is just elaborate cruelty. She pressed the crystal into Serene's hand. This contains encrypted messages, support, resources, a network of questioners who can't speak openly but want you to succeed. Serene stared at the crystal, then at her sister. Why? Because I watched you try to save those humans at Arcturus. Watched you choose their lives over your status, their survival over your safety, and I told myself you were contaminated, weak, lost. Lyris's voice cracked slightly. But standing here, seeing what you've built, understanding what you've survived, sister, I think I'm the one who's lost. I just haven't found my way back yet. The sisters embraced. Jonas turned away, giving them privacy, and felt something settle in his chest. Not peace, exactly, but the beginning of it. Lyris stayed for 3 days. She didn't convert, didn't abandon her Valen logic, didn't suddenly become human, but she asked questions, toured the greenhouse, drank terrible coffee with an expression of polite suffering that made Serene laugh until she cried. And when she left, she looked back once with something that might have been hope. That night, Jonas and Serene sat on the station's western wall, watching the twin moons rise over the desert. His hand, crooked, damaged, but his, rested in hers. Her shoulder, scarred, healing, but strong, pressed against his side. Do you ever regret it? Jonas asked quietly. Staying here, fighting when you could have run? Serene was quiet for a long moment. Among my people, regret is considered wasteful. Dwelling on past choices prevents optimal future decisions. But humans taught me that some wastes are worthwhile. She turned to face him fully. So yes, I regret the things I lost. My status, my home world, the certainty that came with pure logic. But I don't regret finding you, even though I'm contamination personified, especially because of that. She kissed him, soft and certain. You taught me that being contaminated just means being alive enough to care, and caring is what makes us more than our calculations. They sat there until the moon set and the desert dawn turned everything to gold and copper. The station hummed around them, alive with systems they'd rebuilt together. In the greenhouse, hybrid plants grew toward impossible light. In the comm center, messages waited, from exiles, from questioners, from people who'd heard the story and wanted to know if hope was real. And in the space between one heartbeat and the next, Jonas understood what his mother had meant all those years ago. The gold is in what you find, not what you dig for. He'd been searching for iridium, for profit, for the next score that would keep him moving. Instead, he'd found something infinitely more valuable, a home built not from necessity, but from choice. A partner who saw his scars and stayed anyway. A future that looked suspiciously like forever. "Hey, Serene." "Yes?" "Thanks for not killing me that first day." She laughed, the sound crystal clear and completely contaminated. "Thanks for making terrible coffee and worse music and showing me that sometimes inefficiency is just another word for love. That's the most human thing you've ever said." "I know." Her skin glowed rose gold in the dawn light. "I'm learning." Below them, the desert stretched endless and unforgiving. But above them, the sky was clearing. And somewhere in the vast space between stars, others were watching, wondering, questioning their own certainties. The station's official designation appeared on the Frontier Authority registry 3 weeks later. Caldera 3, reclassified. Zone habitability. Status, confirmed. Settlement. Type, mixed species sanctuary. Founders, Jonas Hale, human. Serene, Valen. The name they gave it was simpler. Caldera Unity Protocol, HFY-01. The first shared home. The first proof that contamination could be chosen. The first crack in a wall that had stood for 3,000 years. And standing on that wall, two people who'd been taught they didn't belong anywhere discovered that sometimes the best homes are the ones you build from ruins, hope, and the stubborn refusal to die alone. 5 years after the first transmission, Jonas stood in what used to be the Eastern Wing and watched construction drones place the final support beam for the new medical center. The station had grown beyond recognition. 47 permanent residents now, 12 Valen and 35 human, with another 6 mixed species who defied easy categorization. The greenhouse had become 3 greenhouses. The workshop had become an engineering hub. The meditation room Serene had painted years ago was now a chapel, temple, and philosophy center, serving 7 different belief systems in careful rotation. His left hand still didn't work quite right. Never would. But he'd learned to make it enough. "Jonas, you need to see this." Serene's voice crackled over his comm, carrying that particular note that meant something impossible was happening. Again. He found her in the communications center, surrounded by displays showing data that made his head hurt. She'd aged in the way Valen did, not obviously, but in subtle shifts of color and texture, like silver tarnishing to platinum. Her hair was shorter now, practical for the work she did. The scar on her shoulder had faded to a pale line that she traced sometimes when she thought he wasn't watching. "Another one?" Jonas asked, already knowing the answer. 3, actually." Serene pulled up the manifests. "A Valen scientist exiled for questioning genetic purity protocols. 2 human refugees from the outer colonies looking for fresh starts. And..." She paused, her expression doing that complicated thing it did when emotions and logic went to war. "A family. Human mother, Valen father, 2 hybrid children. They're asking if we'll take them." Jonas felt something settle in his chest. 5 years ago, the idea of human Valen hybrid children would have been theoretical, impossible, probably illegal in 17 different jurisdictions. Now they were real, arriving, needing sanctuary. "Tell them yes," he said. "Always yes." Serene smiled, and after 5 years, Jonas could read every nuance: pride, fear, hope. The certainty that they'd built something worth protecting, and the terror that it might not be enough. She sent the response, then leaned back in her chair, studying the star charts displayed on the main screen. "The Valen Council issued a new directive last month," she said quietly. "They're officially acknowledging the Caldera Unity settlements. There are 7 now, scattered across frontier space. They're calling it the Contamination Spread Protocol, making it illegal to provide resources, acknowledge communication, or offer safe passage to any contaminated individual or facility. And it's not working." Serene pulled up another display, this one showing a cascade of encrypted messages from across known space. "For every official prohibition, There are a dozen covert supporters, scientists sharing research, traders offering supply runs, even some council members sending anonymous resources. She touched the screen, tracing patterns Jonas couldn't follow. We're becoming a movement, Jonas, not just a station. Jonas thought about that, about the 47 people living here now, each with their own story of exile, refuge, choice. About the hybrid plants in the greenhouse that had inspired a dozen xenobotany papers. About the engineering solutions they'd pioneered out of necessity that were being adopted across frontier settlements. About the simple, radical act of choosing compassion over calculation. Good, he said finally. The universe could use more movements. That evening, Jonas found himself in the original greenhouse, the first room they'd built together, now almost a shrine to those early desperate days. The hybrid plants had matured, creating canopies of intertwined earth and Valen species that shouldn't coexist, but did anyway. He sat on the bench Serene had welded from salvaged hull plates, picked up his guitar, and started playing. The song was familiar now, that frontier ballad his mother used to sing, woven together with Serene's Valen work meditation. They'd been playing it together for years, had taught it to others, had watched it spread across the settlement, until it became something like an anthem. Inefficient, imprecise, perfect. Serene appeared in the doorway, backlit by the setting sun, and Jonas's breath still caught. 5 years, and she still did that to him. 5 years, and he still couldn't quite believe she'd chosen this. Chosen him. She crossed to the bench, sat beside him, and began harmonizing without being asked. Her voice had roughened slightly with age and use, losing some of that crystalline purity, gaining something warmer, human almost, or maybe just contaminated. They played until the twin moons rose, until the greenhouse's artificial lighting activated, until footsteps on metal announced they weren't alone anymore. Jonas looked up to find Wei, the botanist who'd been their first visitor, now their permanent agricultural specialist. Behind her, Kresh, the Valen technician, who'd arrived suspicious and stayed loyal. Behind him, a dozen others, residents who'd heard the music and come to listen. No one spoke. They just settled into the space, filling it with presence and breath and the quiet certainty of belonging. This was community. Not planned, not organized, just organic growth around a core of stubborn survival and careful hope. When the song ended, Wei was crying. She wasn't alone. "Tell it again," she said, voice thick. "The story, how this started." Jonas and Serene exchanged glances. They'd told this story 100 times, to newcomers and old-timers, to children and scholars. But it never got old. The story was proof, evidence that the impossible could be chosen. "It started with a storm," Jonas began, his voice falling into the rhythm of a tale told often. "And a Garimpero too stubborn to die alone. And an exile too proud to accept help," Serene continued, picking up the thread seamlessly. "Who met in ruins and built something that shouldn't have worked." They took turns, passing the narrative back and forth, filling in details, sharing the fear and desperation and small moments of grace. Jonas talked about the first coffee Serene had made, terrible and perfect. Serene described the first time Jonas's music made her feel something illogical. They spoke about the battle, about the choice to stand, about discovering that contamination was just another word for caring enough to fight. When they finished, the greenhouse was silent except for breathing and the whisper of hybrid leaves in recycled air. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened?" Kresh asked finally, his Valen accent still thick despite years of practice. "If you'd run? If you'd chosen logic over emotion?" "Every day," Serene admitted. "But wondering doesn't change reality. We chose, and the choosing made us what we are." "Which is," Wei pressed. Jonas looked at Serene, at the community surrounding them, at the station that had grown from desperation into something approaching home. "Human, I guess, in the ways that matter." "Even the Valen among us?" someone asked from the back. Especially us, Serene said firmly. Because being human isn't about biology. It's about choosing connection over isolation, about building instead of calculating, about accepting contamination as the price of being alive. The gathering broke up slowly, people drifting back to their quarters, their duties, their lives. Jonas and Serene remained in the greenhouse, surrounded by impossible growth and the echo of shared song. 5 years, Jonas said quietly. Sometimes it feels like 5 minutes. Sometimes like 5 lifetimes. Both, Serene agreed. Time is relative when you're building something permanent. Is it permanent? He gestured at the station, the settlement, everything they'd created. Or are we just delaying the inevitable? The council could decide we're too dangerous, could send a fleet instead of bounty hunters, could do many things, Serene interrupted, taking his hand. The crooked one, the damaged one, the one that proved survival had costs. But they won't, because we're not just dangerous to the council. We're dangerous to certainty. We're proof that their absolutes are negotiable, and you can't destroy proof without acknowledging it exists. Jonas turned that over, found it solid. So we just keep building? We keep building. Serene leaned her head on his shoulder, and they sat there until the greenhouse lights dimmed to night cycle, until the station settled into its evening rhythms, until the only sound was breathing and heartbeats in imperfect synchronization. 3 months later, the Valen Council issued another directive. This one was different. Not condemnation, not prohibition, just acknowledgement. The Caldera Unity Protocols, as they were now called, were recognized as independent settlements outside Valen jurisdiction. Not endorsed, not supported, but acknowledged. It was the first crack in 3,000 years of absolute certainty. Serene cried when she read it. Jonas held her and understood. This wasn't victory, wasn't even acceptance, but it was the beginning of both. The census came back that year, showing 59 residents, 63 the next, 74 the year after that. Every one of them, a person who'd chosen contamination over purity, connection over isolation, the messy, uncertain work of building over the clean certainty of exile. The Frontier Authority officially recognized their settlement status in Year 7. Other independent stations started reaching out, asking for advice, sharing stories, creating a network of communities that operated on principles of mutual support rather than pure transaction. The movement Serene had predicted was becoming infrastructure. In Year 8, Jonas found Serene in the original quarters, their quarters, though they'd long since moved to larger spaces. She stood at the window, looking out over the desert that had once seemed so alien and now felt like home. "Remember the first time we stood here?" she asked as he approached. "You were pointing a plasma torch at my head. You smiled at me, showed teeth. I thought you were threatening me." Jonas laughed, wrapping his arms around her waist from behind. "And now? Now I know humans show teeth when happy, when sad, when lying, when truthful. It's inefficient." She turned in his arms, her violet eyes bright. "I love it." They kissed, slow and certain, the way people do when they have time, when they have forever. Outside, the settlement hummed with life. Children playing in corridors, engineers solving problems, botanists nurturing impossible growth. Inside, 2 people who'd met in ruins continued building what they'd started. A home that welcomed the exiled, a community that celebrated contamination, a future that looked suspiciously like hope. 10 years after that first storm, the Caldera Unity census showed 147 permanent residents. 12 Valen, 78 human, 53 mixed species, and 4 hybrid children born on site. The medical center Jonas had watched them build now had 3 wings. The greenhouse complex provided 70% of their food. The engineering hub was developing technologies that made frontier survival less desperate and more sustainable. And in the archives, filed under historical documents of significance, was a single entry. Caldera Unity Protocol 001, the document that started it all. Jonas stood in that archive, older now, grayer, his left hand still crooked but functional enough. Beside him, Serene looked barely different. Vahlen aging was subtle, measured in decades rather than years. But her eyes had changed. Less analytical, more warm, less certain, more hopeful. "Do you think this is what your mother meant?" Serene asked, touching the pendant Jonas still wore. "About the gold being in what you find?" Jonas considered the question, considered the station around them, the lives they'd touched, the movement they'd accidentally started. Considered the woman beside him who'd been exiled for compassion and had built a home from it. "Yeah," he said finally. "I think this is exactly what she meant." They walked back through the settlement together, past the greenhouse where hybrid plants grew, past the workshop where human and Vahlen engineers collaborated, past the chapel where 7 belief systems coexisted in careful harmony, past children playing games that mixed Earth and Vahlen rules, past adults sharing meals that combined both cultures' foods, past all the small impossible things that added up to something larger. At the western wall, the same place they'd sat 10 years ago after Lyris's visit, they found a gathering. Not planned, not organized, just people drawn to the spot where the view was best, where the desert met the sky, where you could see the whole settlement spread out like evidence that hope was real. Someone had brought a guitar. Someone else had brought drums. A Vahlen woman Jonas didn't recognize was teaching a human child a work meditation. A human engineer was explaining efficiency ratios to a Vahlen teenager who looked fascinated rather than bored. It was chaos. It was contamination. It was perfect. Jonas picked up the guitar without thinking, and Serene began harmonizing without being asked. The song spread through the gathering like ripples on water. That frontier ballad mixed with Vahlen meditation, human imprecision tangled with alien structure. After 10 years, everyone knew the words. After 10 years, it had become theirs. They sang until the twin moons rose, until the desert cooled, until someone pointed at the sky and shouted. Jonas followed the gesture and saw lights descending. Ships, multiple ships, more than he could count. For a heartbeat, fear. Then he saw the transponder codes, saw the mixed fleet composition, saw humans and Vahlen and others arriving together. Not invaders, visitors, settlers, people who'd heard the story and wanted to be part of the building. "They keep coming," Serene whispered, her hand finding his. "Every year more people, more exiles choosing connection, more questioners choosing contamination. When does it end?" Jonas thought about that. About his mother's pendant, about Hadley's hope, about all the places he'd run from before learning to stand. About the woman who'd pointed a plasma torch at his head and ended up saving his life in ways she'd never understand. About the settlement that had grown from ruins and desperation into something approaching civilization. "Maybe it doesn't," he said. "Maybe that's the point. You don't build home and then stop. You keep building, keep choosing. Keep contaminating the universe with the radical idea that caring is stronger than calculating. That is the most inefficient philosophy I have ever heard." "I know." Jonas kissed her temple, watched the ships descend, and felt the future arriving like a promise. "Want to help me greet them?" "Always." They walked down from the wall together, toward the landing pads where tomorrow was touching down. Behind them, the settlement hummed with life and song and stubborn survival. Above them, stars wheeled in patterns that hadn't changed in millennia, eternal and indifferent. But here, on this red dust planet at the edge of nowhere, something had changed. People had learned that exile could be chosen, that contamination could be celebrated, that the space between species was just distance waiting to be crossed. That home wasn't something you were born into or exiled from. It was something you built with the people who saw you broken and stayed anyway. The ships landed. The airlocks opened, and Jonas Hale, Garimpiro and founder, stood beside Serene, exile and visionary, ready to welcome the next wave of the contaminated home. Because in the end, that's what Caldera Unity had become. Not a settlement, not a protocol, not even a movement, just home. Messy, imperfect, inefficient, and absolutely, irrevocably alive. And when the sun set that evening, painting the desert in shades of copper and gold, if you listened carefully through the wind and the distance, you could hear two voices singing together. One human, rough and simple and pure. One Valen, crystalline and complex and warm. Harmony woven from difference, music built from ruins. A song that whispered to anyone listening, "You are not alone. You are not broken. You are not too contaminated to come home." The desert remembered. The station remembered. And across the galaxy, in councils and academies and quiet rooms where questioners gathered, people were beginning to remember too. That sometimes the gold really is in what you find, not what you dig for. That sometimes contamination is just another word for being human. That sometimes the most logical thing you can do is choose to care. And sometimes in the ruins of exile, two people meet. They build. They choose. They contaminate each other with hope. And that, more than any protocol or certainty or 3,000-year-old logic, is how you change the universe. One song, one station, one impossible choice at a time. Home is what you fix, not what you find. And they were home. Maybe humanity's strength was never about domination or conquest, but about the courage to care in a universe that calls compassion a flaw. Caldera didn't just survive. It chose to exist differently. And maybe that's the truest act of rebellion. Building something gentle in a galaxy that only understands power. What would you have done? Follow logic or stay for someone who made you believe in more? Can compassion ever be stronger than calculation? If exile means freedom, what does belonging really cost? If you felt what this story meant, write the word contamination in the comments, just to show you stayed until the end. Tell me, from which city or planet are you watching? Subscribe if you believe stories like this remind us what we're still capable of. Like, share, and click on the final card to see more chronicles of what it truly means to be human, out there among the stars.